In the heart of our quiet town stood the college campus, a place steeped in dark legends and whispered fears. Its towering, ivy-clad buildings loomed under the weight of countless ghost stories passed down through generations. Among them, the Humanities Building was the most infamous, a silent witness to unexplained happenings. On foggy nights, shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and dimly lit windows hinted at figures no one could explain. For most, the tales were mere fiction. But for those who dared to enter, like me, the boundary between myth and reality was far thinner than we ever imagined. The Humanities Building felt alive in its silence, as if the walls held their breath. The long, dimly lit hallway stretched endlessly, the buzzing fluorescent lights flickering above like dying fireflies. Old posters and scrawled graffiti lined the walls, relics of students long gone. At the far end, the staircase leading to the basement loomed like a portal into another world, its shadows twisting unnaturally. Every creak of the floor, every distant sound felt amplified, as though the building itself was watching. It wasn't just the darkness that made my heart race. It was the unmistakable sensation of not being alone. The dark room was suffocating, its air thick with the scent of old chemicals and time-worn film. The faint red glow of the safety light painted the walls with eerie shadows, making the small space feel even tighter. As we stood in silence, a strange sensation crept over me. Gentle tugs at the back of my shirt as if unseen fingers were testing my nerves. I stayed quiet, hoping the recorder would catch something, but the feeling grew stronger, more insistent. The walls seemed to close in, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the room. Something was there, just beyond sight. The basement felt like another world, cold, damp, and filled with the smell of dust and decay. Props and costumes were scattered haphazardly, their lifeless shapes casting grotesque shadows under the pale glow of a UV light. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building above. Then it happened. A sudden, icy grip tightened around my neck, stealing my breath and forcing me to my knees. Panic surged as the shadows seemed to grow darker, almost alive. The air was heavy with a malevolent presence, and I knew something in the darkness didn't want us there. The stairwell was a labyrinth of shadows, dim emergency lights flickering weakly overhead. The echoes of frantic footsteps pounded against the concrete walls, followed by the sharp slam of a door. Two of us fled in terror, but what followed was impossible to explain. The stairwell door opened again, slowly, deliberately, yet no footsteps accompanied it. The oppressive silence was broken only by my pounding heartbeat as I glanced upward. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a shadowy figure, featureless and still. Its presence was chilling, unnatural, and filled with silent malice. We weren't alone, and it wasn't letting us go. The recording device sat on the table, its tiny screen glowing faintly in the dim room. We listened intently, the playback filled with static and muffled noises. Then, a whisper emerged, distorted, chilling, and unmistakably calling my name. My breath caught as the air around us seemed to grow colder. In the corner of the room, the shadows shifted unnaturally, revealing the faint outline of a figure. It didn't move, yet its presence filled the space with a paralyzing dread. The whisper played again, clearer this time, as if the entity was closer. Whatever it was, it knew me, and it wanted more. The living room was a chaotic tableau of madness. Papers covered in frantic, illegible scribbles and dark, twisted drawings littered the floor, stretching out like a map of despair. At the center, I sat cross-legged, motionless, my face pale and expressionless, eyes hollow as if staring into a void. The faint glow of a nearby lamp flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. The room felt heavy, oppressive, alive with an invisible presence. Whispers, soft, sinister, echoed faintly, though the house was empty. Something had followed me home, and it had rooted itself deep within me. The bedroom was cloaked in darkness, the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting pale beams across the room. On the nightstand sat a small vial of holy water and my father's rosary, their presence offering fragile comfort. The air was still, yet it carried an unshakable weight, as though something unseen lingered just out of reach. My gaze drifted to the window. There in the shadows, a figure stood, formless, shifting, its outline pulsating like living smoke. It didn't move, yet its presence filled the room with suffocating dread. A single knock echoed through the silence. Whatever it wasn't leaving. North Lake College in Dallas, Texas, a place meant to foster dreams, aspirations, and growth. But on one ordinary day, it became a nightmare. A faceless horror etched into the lives of those who walked its halls. The unease began the day before. Students settled into their routines, unaware of the warning to come. The intercom crackled, and the principal's voice broke through, distorted, urgent. An emergency has been reported on campus. Please evacuate immediately. Confused glances filled classrooms as students gathered their belongings and shuffled into the halls. Tension hung heavy in the air, but no danger emerged. Hours later, it was dismissed as a false alarm, a mere disruption in an otherwise ordinary day. Yet the unease lingered, invisible but palpable, a quiet premonition of the nightmare waiting to strike when they least expected it. The following day began like any other. Notes scribbled on paper, the soft hum of voices in classrooms. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. The first gunshots tore through the air, loud and unrelenting, echoing down the hall. Glass shattered, screams followed, and the world transformed in an instant. Just 100 feet away, terror swept through the building. Students froze in disbelief before instinct took over. The normalcy of moments before vanished, replaced by a primal fear that gripped every soul. The hallways once filled with laughter were now the stage for something unspeakable, and survival became the only thought. In one classroom, panic took over. A student rushed to lock the door as the others crammed into the darkest corner. The principal's voice, shaky and frantic, echoed over the intercom. "We are in lockdown." Hearts pounded, breaths were held, and an unbearable silence enveloped the room, broken only by muffled sobs. The room was suffocatingly still. Students clung to each other, their fear palpable in the dim light. A faint creak from the hallway sent shivers through the group. Shadows danced outside the frosted glass, and each passing second felt like an eternity, as if death itself waited just beyond the door. Across town, he sat frozen, staring at his phone. Message after message. "Are you okay? Please answer," remained unanswered. The silence was unbearable, each second stretching into eternity. His heart raced, imagining the worst. Desperation clawed at him as he begged for a sign that the person he loved was still alive. After what felt like hours, the police arrived, sweeping through the building room by room. Voices called out, guiding students to safety. Slowly they emerged, faces pale, bodies trembling, clutching their belongings as if they might anchor them to reality. Among them was her, shaken but alive. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her phone, her hands shaking. Relief mixed with lingering fear as flashing red and blue lights lit the night, casting haunting shadows on the building behind her. The nightmare wasn't over. It never would be. But in that moment, survival was the only thing that mattered. The classroom stood empty now, silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded. Desks were overturned, notebooks lay scattered, and a lone backpack sat abandoned in the corner. The air was heavy, thick with the echoes of fear and desperation. Shadows lingered in the dim light, as if the building itself mourned what had been lost. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the scars etched into these walls and the people who had survived. For those who lived through it, the memory would never fade, a constant reminder that the sanctuary they once trusted could so easily become a battleground. The boundary waters of Minnesota, a vast, untamed wilderness where the forest stretches endlessly, shrouded in mist. No roads, no engines, just the haunting stillness of nature. It was here that a group of college students began their search and rescue training, unaware of what lurked within the shadows. As they ventured deeper, the air seemed heavier, the silence louder. Then it started, branches snapping in the distance, a faint whistle carried by the wind. One of them swore they saw a deer standing on two legs far off in the fog. They laughed it off, but deep down, they all felt it, Something was watching. The group pressed on, their boots crunching through the underbrush as the forest seemed to close in around them. What started as casual banter faded into uneasy silence. Shadows danced between the trees, and every snap of a branch made them flinch. Then, the whistle came again, sharp, deliberate, like someone calling from far away. The girl at the back of the line froze, her voice trembling as she pointed ahead. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, stood a figure, tall and unnaturally still. It looked like a deer, but it wasn't. The group quickened their pace, pretending not to notice. Night fell over the forest, swallowing the group in darkness. Their campsite was a small island of light, the flickering fire casting long shadows on the towering trees. The quiet was unnerving. No wind, no chirping insects, just the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. As they tried to sleep, faint sounds circled the tents, heavy breathing, slow, deliberate sniffing. Some thought it was a bear, others dismissed it as wolves. But when morning came, the ground told a different story. Around the tents were tracks, deer, wolf, and something larger, heavier. They laughed it off, but unease gripped them all. By midday, they found their rescue dummy lying in a small clearing. But something wasn't right. The dummy, meant to simulate a lost hiker, was torn and shredded, its surface covered in deep claw marks. The group exchanged uneasy glances, nervously laughing it off as curious raccoons. Yet, the scratches were too large, too precise. Nearby, the grass was flattened, and fresh claw marks gouged the surrounding trees. The forest felt different now, watchful and alive. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their hurried footsteps as they moved away. Deep in the woods, something unseen shifted, following their every move. Back on campus, Megan thought the unease would fade, but the forest wasn't done with her. Her dorm window faced the woods, and late one night she saw them, two bright yellow eyes staring back from the tree line. They didn't blink, didn't move, just burned through the darkness. Frozen in fear, she couldn't look away. Her friend, seeing her panic, glanced outside and screamed, slamming the blinds shut. "It's a Wendigo," she whispered, her voice trembling. Megan wanted to laugh it off, but the dread in her friend's voice stayed with her. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew it was still watching. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences spread across campus. Dead animals began appearing near the woods, their twisted bodies reeking of decay. The stench of rot lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Students whispered about seeing bizarre creatures at night, animals walking unnaturally, their shapes distorted. Some claimed to hear blood-curdling screams echoing through the darkness, screams that kept them awake, trembling in their beds. Megan's native friend grew more frantic, warning everyone, "It's the Wendigo." But no one believed her, dismissing the warnings as superstition. All the while, the presence in the woods grew stronger and closer. Late one night, Megan woke to an eerie tapping at her window. At first, it was soft, almost rhythmic, like branches brushing against the glass. But it grew louder, sharper, insistent. Annoyed, she shouted for whoever it was to leave, thinking it was a prank. Then a voice came, a sickly sweet imitation of her mother's. "Megan, it's cold. Let me in." Her blood ran cold as the tapping turned to scratching. Gripping her gun, she hesitated before yanking the blinds open. There it was, yellow eyes, jagged teeth, and a decaying, twisted form. It smiled and whispered, "Let me in, Megan." Megan froze as the creature outside her window stared back. Its rotting, deer-like face twisted into a grotesque smile. Its glowing yellow eyes burned with malevolence, and its jagged teeth gleamed in the dim moonlight. The thing pressed its clawed hands against the glass, scratching faint lines as it spoke again, mimicking her mother's voice. "Come on, Megan. Open the window." Its voice turned into a chilling laugh that curdled her blood. Trembling, she raised her gun and aimed. The creature's smile faded, replaced by a furious snarl. It screamed, a bone-rattling, ear-piercing sound, as she fired. The glass shattered, and it vanished into the night. The deafening scream echoed through the dorm as the creature recoiled, its twisted body writhing in the moonlight. Megan's gunshot shattered the window, the sound cutting through the chaos. For a moment, the creature's glowing yellow eyes locked on hers, filled with rage and something else, hunger. Then it bolted, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, its unearthly scream fading into the night. Megan stood frozen, her hands shaking, the gun still aimed at the empty window. The dorm lights flickered on as students poured into the hall, shouting in confusion. Megan knew one thing, whatever it wasn't gone for good. Dawn broke over the forest, the golden rays of sunlight piercing through the dense canopy and illuminating the stillness of the boundary waters. The woods, once cloaked in shadow, now appeared peaceful, almost deceptively so. Dew clung to the leaves and the faint mist hung low, swirling lazily as if the forest itself exhaled a sigh of relief. But beneath the serene facade, the scars of the night lingered. Megan walked cautiously along the forest's edge, her heart heavy and her thoughts racing. The shattered dorm window had been hastily boarded up, the bullet hole serving as a grim reminder of what she had faced. As the light of day stretched across the clearing, she noticed faint claw marks etched into the tree trunks, too high and too deep to belong to any normal animal. Broken branches littered the ground, and patches of dirt bore strange impressions, hoof-like tracks, but larger and misshapen. The campus began to stir with life again, students passing in nervous groups exchanging whispers about what had happened. Some dismissed it as a wild animal, others weren't so sure. Megan, however, knew the truth. Something unnatural had followed them back from the boundary waters. Her Native American friend had warned them, but no one had truly listened. Now she was gone, transferring to a new school far from the woods, unwilling to risk another encounter. Megan glanced back at the forest one last time. Deep in the shadows, she thought she saw something. Two faint yellow glimmers disappearing into the darkness. She shivered, knowing this was far from over. The forest was silent but not empty. Whatever had come for them still lurked, waiting. And Megan knew deep down that it might one day return.